sea of red, it's time for another Fireside Chat, the official podcast of Flames fans. It's go time.
Well, the Calgary Flames are singing the St. Louis Blues this week after 4 games of an interesting road trip. As always, I'm Dan alongside Matt. And Matt, before we jump into the 4 games for this week, we should probably make a note that the Calgary Flames lost an important member of the Flames community, a guy who I think we can all say is probably one of the few forever of Flames, going all the way back to the Atlanta Flames, and that's Al MacNeil. Al MacNeil, former GM, former assistant GM, former head coach. He's done a little bit of everything, director of player personnel for different teams. A little bit of, I would say, everything you can do in the NHL he's done. Passed away on the 5th of January, unfortunately.
He has been a mainstay in this organization literally since the 70s, which you can't really say that about very many people. And right through to the end, he was still giving tips and pointers to players and GMs and everybody, basically. And
I heard a story recently that he gives a report card grade to all the players on the team, even to the day that he died at 89.
Yep, and just old school hockey guy, and we were very privileged to have him as a part of the organization for as long as we did, and the community as a whole, and just condolences to the MacNeil family.
For those that don't know, Al MacNeil holds the unique honor of being the last Atlanta Flames Calgary coach, or Atlanta Flames coach in 79-80, and the first Calgary Flames coach in 80-81. He coached for the Flames 80-81 to 80-82, and then came back, and not a lot of people remember this, after Greg Gilbert got fired. There's a name we don't talk about very often. In December of 2002, they needed someone to step behind the bench, so Al MacNeil came back behind the bench for 25 days, 11 games, where the Flames went 4-5-2 under MacNeil, and then he stepped aside as soon as Darryl Sutter found his home here. And we all know how that went. So, little interesting footnote to history there. Make note of that. Maybe the next time we do a trivia night with our friends at Bow River Brewing, that fact will show up. He's been around. Everybody in this organization knows MacNeil. Good guy to have around. He's part of the American Hockey League Hall of Fame. I'm kind of surprised not the NHL Hall of Fame in the Builders category. Maybe he will be now. Really a good guy. Met him a few times. Funny guy. He'll be missed by everybody in the Calgary Flames organization. Well, with that, shall we chat about this week?
Yes, it was an interesting road trip for sure.
The Flames played 4 games on the road. The first one was against the Chicago Blackhawks in Chicago. Peltier got 3 points here. This was also, a lot of people remember, the Rory Kieran show. Rory Kieran's playing his first NHL game and got an assist on both Peltier goals in this one, and then also on the Jake Bean goal in the second, as the Flames won 5-2 against the Blackhawks.
The Flames, I felt, just completely controlled the play for pretty much the lion's share of the game, and Chicago is terrible, to put it bluntly. The Calgary very rarely manhandles teams and out talents and outclasses them in every facet of the game. This was one of them, and it's very understandable why Chicago is the worst team in the NHL.
The Flames, if you didn't know where the Flames were in the standings and you watch this game in a microcosm, you'd probably think that the Flames were destined for the Stanley Cup Finals this year.
Yeah, it was, one team basically looking like an AHL roster and the other looking more like an all-star team. And yeah, Chicago's bad. And I know some people are a little bit down on Bedard because he's not leading. He is the only player that's good on that team, and you can't generate everything by yourself, no matter how good you are.
I don't know. Seth Jones is okay. Teravainen is not bad.
Yeah, they have bodies that could play in the NHL, but. Yeah, the only good player they have is Bedard, and it's going to take them 3 or 4 years to make the playoffs at this rate. It's going to be a long time for the Blackhawks.
It's kind of nice when you're going through a rebuild too, to see a team like the Blackhawks and you go, okay, we're further along than these guys are.
Yes.
And it's only year one. Nice thing to me in this one to see some new faces on the score sheet like we talked about. Peltier gets his second and third of the year. Cairns gets an assist on both those. Braden Pahal gets his second assist of the year. Jake Bean on the score sheet. You know you're not doing well when Jake Bean lights you up. Peltier gets an assist on that one. Igor Sharangovich gets a goal. Like we're seeing some of the non-usual scorers, which I think is always a good sign too. You need everyone to be pulling their weight.
Well, and seeing some guys breaking out a bit of funks like Sharangovich, who's been around it for a while now, and getting good chances, just none of them going in. Hopefully with that one going in, he'll start scoring more on the regular. And interestingly, for 5-on-5 point generation over the last month, Jacob Peltier is actually tied for first amongst all Flames, which since his recall. So just an interesting thing to note.
Yeah, and we know that Peltier and Cairns have played together in the Wranglers, and I thought that they both look better together in this one. And I'm thinking, if you're going to keep Cairns around, you almost want to keep him with Peltier.
Oh, for sure. And chemistry is a thing. And as we saw with Huberdeau not having chemistry with pretty much anybody for the first two seasons with the Flames, if you find that chemistry, you just kind of staple those two guys together and let it rip.
For sure. Later in the week, we saw Cairns with Sharangovich and Kuzmenko, and while it still looked good, I didn't think he looked as good as he did with Peltier.
Yes.
So then the Flames moved to St. Louis, which we've talked about this one before. They had 2 games, not back-to-back, but 2 games in St. Louis in the same week, couple days apart. It was Tuesday and Thursday. You never see that. And Flames don't do well in either one. The first one, the Flames dropped 2-1. Faxa breaks a tie in the third. The Blues edge the Flames, and the only Flames goal here, Kevin Ball gets his second of the year.
Yeah, the Flames kind of got behind the 8 ball early with the first-minute goal by Colton Parayko, and that whole defensive sequence that led up to the goal, and Vladar giving up a bit of a rebound prior to the goal. Everybody just was scrambling to start, and the Flames never really recovered until halfway through the third period, and then pretty much quickly gave up the goal again. It was just one of those games where Calgary, I don't feel, generated very much offense at all in the game, and played very sloppily for most of it. St. Louis, much like Calgary over the past couple of years, has a few good players and then a lot of not so good players, and their good players were enough to carry the day.
I felt like after that first St. Louis goal, Calgary, and we've seen this so often with Flames teams of the past, and kind of going to what Al asked us about last week in his email, is the Flames, got scored on, kind of stopped carrying. It's like it took the wind out of their sails. And then by the time they actually realized, okay, we've got to get back into this, it was too late.
Yes.
That mental consistency.
Yeah. And even when we scored the goal, Calgary kind of sat back a little bit, and St. Louis quickly responded, and Calgary really didn't have an answer after that point.
Yeah, they really didn't use that to sort of boost themselves. So I would say, when I look back at this one, the Flames deserve this loss.
Oh, for sure. And, as much as the score was close, I felt that the overall gameplay, very much favored St. Louis, and I felt very much like St. Louis was in control of this game throughout, and Calgary was just kind of hanging around without, even when they tied it, I didn't really feel like they were going to win this game, and was kind of just hoping that they'd get it to overtime, which obviously didn't happen, so it is what it is.
Yeah, no, and St. Louis, a team that's doing well with responding to their new coach, Jim Montgomery. And, I think we're seeing that new coaching boost that you've talked about here with the St. Louis Blues as well. Mm-hmm. Calgary then had a day off and then took on the Blues again in the same building, which is very weird. And this time, I would say, looked even worse. The Calgary Flames dropped the next one 4-1 to St. Louis. This was a terrible first period for the Flames, like absolutely terrible way to start this game, which I was surprised because the last game, I sort of understood the sluggishness. They were on a back-to-back. You guys had a day off. You were rested, and they came out looking like they'd played like 3 games in a row.
Well, and the thing is that they look like, well, like after the loss, you would expect them to prepare for the next one, to get a good start, especially after kind of dogging it for most of the first St. Louis game, where they didn't really generate any offense at all in the contest. And then they come out so badly that, it was 3-0 right away. And the game was done before the first intermission, and just a shockingly bad performance by the Flames. Yeah,
like I don't know. I don't think there's any reason for them to have come out so poorly, and they were down 3-0 after the first. Second period, they got a goal from Sharon Govich, assisted by Peltier and Cairns. But then Braden Shen scored again. This is also a game where Dustin Wolf didn't look great. Like, the whole team just did not look great in this one.
Yes. Like, it was a team performance. Like, everybody was not good.
No. And again, the Flames, they didn't look good. I think they knew they didn't look good if you listen to some of what the team said. And there was no excuse not to look good in this one. Like, this is a really disappointing Flames game.
Yes.
And then for Hockey Day in Canada on Saturday, January 18th, the Flames went to Winnipeg. All the places to celebrate in Canada, that's exactly where we want to be, in Winnipeg. And the Flames ended up looking better in this one. Dustin Wolf got put back in net. A lot of people weren't sure if he would have. I thought it was the right idea to put him back in net. As a starter, you've got to learn how to rebound from a bad game. And the Flames took over in this one, winning 3-1 against the Winnipeg Jets, getting goals from Blake Coleman, Andrei Kuzmenko, a name we haven't talked about a lot on the score sheet, and Matt Coronado.
Yeah, this was the Dustin Wolf show. The Flames were extremely lucky to not lose this game, frankly. Fortunate bounce off the Coronado shot, hitting Pionk and then off the crossbar and in. Kuzmenko with the brilliant shot in the second period off the post and in, and the empty netter. Winnipeg completely outclassed the Flames in this game, and if it was not for Dustin Wolf standing on his head, the Jets easily win this contest. And if you look back to the prior meeting where the Flames lost 5-3, I felt that the Flames were very evenly matched in that game, and I thought actually deserved the win in that contest. This one, Winnipeg was all over Calgary, and somehow we came out with the 2 points.
You're going to have those games where you don't look great or your goalie saves you, but you can't rely on Dustin Wolf to do that every game. I mean, it's great the Flames did that. Obviously, they didn't get that from him in St. Louis, but the rest of the team really needs to, thank him for that and make sure that they're ready to go next game. Because, especially for a young goalie, this cannot be the norm.
No, and
it's not Kipper 2.0.
Yeah, and even if he is, he needs a team in front of him, and it's not fair to him or any of the other players to have the expectation of, we'll win because the goalie's great, and which I felt that the Flames after the 0-4 run kind of got into the routine of, we'll be fine because Kipper's just going to Kipper every game, and we saw whenever Kipper wasn't in net, the Flames would get shelled 6-0 every time. So it's just one of those where it's frustrating to see games like this, despite the win, because it does kind of set a bad precedent of relying on the goalie too much.
Yeah, I mean, your goalie's there to bail you out. It's going to happen every team at some point, but it can't become the norm.
No.
And, this one has to feel good for the Flames, too. I mean, they just lost to St. Louis, who's below them in the standings. To have a 3-1 win against the Jets at least gets you a little bit of breathing room But as they come home and have a bit of a break now for 4 days, they're going to need to, I think, regroup and figure out how do we make sure we don't have a week like this again.
Oh, I was going to say about Kuzmenko. It was nice to see him actually get a goal. And sometimes things can be silly like that, where if you just get one, it kind of gets the monkey off the back. And, there was a number of plays recently where you could see that he was trying too hard and making poor decisions because he was trying too hard to force plays. So maybe with getting the goal, he might reset himself a bit and, start doing things a little bit, with a little less pressure, and maybe some of the offense might start returning to his game.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know.
I'm hopeful for him.
I'm hopeful, but at the same time, I'm thinking, you know what? I don't know. I'm hopeful for sure, but I think that at some point you've got to figure out if you want to keep him around or cut bait on him. Like, it's just been so up and down this year.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's just because of the fact that we're pretty much going to be riding with him regardless, at least till the trade deadline, that hopefully he can figure out, how to generate some offense between now and then, because that would be kind of like a trade deadline acquisition for the Flames if both he and Sharon Govich got going and generating at least a little bit of offense here and there.
Do you think there's any chance the Flames would waive him and send him down?
I don't really. I think that honestly, I think that there might be a team that wants a tryout basically with him, to see a cheap deadline acquisition, and I think the Flames might be able to get a 6th or 7th round pick for here, eat half the salary, and we'll see if he can turn it around here. If not, then healthy scratch time, and
ride the pine for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless they need the roster spot, I can't see them moving him down to the AHL at all.
No.
So, wrapping up the week then, the Calgary Flames now sit 4th in the Pacific Division with 51 points. They've played 45 games, 22 wins, 16 losses, 17 overtime losses. They're behind LA, Edmonton, and Vegas. And after, I guess, the games with everything else we've seen, Vancouver right behind them at 50, Seattle at 43. Seattle's probably not going to make the playoffs. And if we take a look at the wild card rankings, we now have the wild card number 1, Colorado at 57, Calgary at 51, Vancouver at 50, and St. Louis after picking up 2 points against the Flames at 48. So, not only did they drop 2 games to St. Louis, but that put St. Louis dangerously close to the Flames now. I mean, if they would have dropped to Buffalo, I would have been fine with that. But that's the other downside of this St. Louis week, is you've given St. Louis 4 points to potentially get up on you.
Yes. And also, a thing to note, the Flames, if the draft was today, would have the 19th overall selection, and the Florida Panthers would have the 21st overall selection. So, people worried about the draft pick, it's a jump ball at this point.
Well, would they actually get that pick? Because wouldn't the lower one go to Montreal?
Yeah, one of the two. So I'm just more illustrating that, at this point, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. The difference between 2 picks is nothing, basically. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. I think if the Flames are going to make a playoff run just because of that first round condition, this is the year to do it, right? Because the difference between, if you're giving it up, or even if you end up keeping one, the difference between 20th and, 21st or 19th and 30th is not high.
No. And we even saw when the Flames drafted Connor Zary, they traded down a couple picks for a 3rd round pick, and then a couple more for another 3rd round pick. So the difference between, say, Calgary and Florida's pick is literally a 3rd, which whoop-de-doo.
Yep. And then just as a housekeeping note here, it's been announced, Elliot Friedman announced it during Hockey Day in Canada. It's officially on the Flames schedule now. The game that was canceled because the LA Wildfires in LA has been rescheduled for April 17th in LA. That's an 8:30 p.m. Mountain start time. So it's going to be a late starting game for the Flames, but that's the absolute last day of the regular season, and that's the day that they booked that game for.
Yeah, and a nice touch by the LA Kings to change out their center ice logo to give a tip of the hat to the fire department in LA. I thought that was really classy by them, and I hope that everybody in LA is doing all right in the aftermath of the wildfires and all that.
Yeah, apparently LA's working on some sort of an alumni celebrity game too for all the people affected and the first responders and all that. That'd be kind of fun to see.
Yes.
So Matt, before we, I guess, move away from this week, a couple of things I wanted to chat with you about. One is some potential roster moves. Like, I'm looking at this Flames roster, and as we know, they're struggling this week. I'm not sure that the roster on the ice is the way they should be moving forward. Kevin Rooney has not looked good. I think Kevin Rooney's staying on the roster because he's a centerman, but I don't think he still needs that spot. And Walker Duehr seems to have gone back to being Walker Duehr, not ready for the NHL. So let me throw a couple ideas by you here and see what you think. We know the Flames are short centermen, especially with Zari out, so Sharon Govich has been converted. Rory Cairns could play center. I think you could put him if you wanted to at the fourth line center. But if you're looking to bring in somebody for your fourth line center and maybe, take Rooney out of lineup, I think you need to bring in a like player, a guy who sort of projects that way. What would you think about swapping Rooney for Wranglers captain Clark Bishop?
That would be perfectly fine. I do not mind, especially with players that are just kind of there, like Duehr or Rooney, of swapping out deck chairs. Nobody's going to claim either Rooney or Bishop or Duehr, on waivers.
And even if they do, you can have them at this point.
Yeah, oh no, we lost our relevant
underperforming fourth line center.
Oh no.
Yeah.
And realistically, if you brought up Clark Bishop, he's not going to be worse than Rooney or Duehr.
No.
Even if you brought up Stromgren to replace Duehr, that's not going to be a step down. There's not really any downside to swapping out things just to try and give the team a spark. And
I want to keep Cairns off the fourth line because I think he needs more time than the fourth line is going to provide him. I like the idea of Sharon Govich, Cairns, and Peltier as a third line. But yeah, I don't know. Rooney's looked ineffective, and I think he's been in the lineup because he's the only other centerman in a team that needs centermen. But I would totally try. And Pat Steinberg mentioned the same idea I had that day of, I think it was after the second St. Louis game, is send Rooney down, bring Clark Bishop up.
Yeah, and Bishop brings a little bit of edge to his game. He's more in the line of Lomberg than he is like Rooney. In terms of being an energy guy. I also want to
32 points in 37 games in the AHL for Bishop this year.
Yeah, all of the Wranglers players have been generating a ton of offense, which is nice to see. I also wanted to talk about potentially recalling a defenseman or two because Soloviev, Kuznetsov, and Poirier have all looked exceptionally good this season. And I think, especially with Soloviev and Kuznetsov, it's getting closer to seeing what you have there with those guys.
I guess I'm not against that, but I guess my question is who on the Flames has played poorly they should come out? Those all feel like post-deadline tryouts to me.
I agree. And I think that you might see guys like Hanley, Miramonov get moved to the press box. Bean possibly. Just shift things
Bean's
around.
Bean's been looking better.
True.
I don't disagree with you on the back end, but I just don't think there's been any defensemen that are bad. I think Rooney's been bad. We even saw Rooney stapled to the bench for a whole period.
Yes.
In the St. Louis game.
Yeah, and it's one of those where I think that we should start, despite being in a playoff push, start to push some of the younger guys into the lineup to give a little bit of energy and boost to the team overall, because recently most of the good players, and I'm talking over the last 2-3 months, most of the good players have been the young guys, whether it's Coronado, whether it's Zari, whether it's Peltier, whether it's Cairns, Wolf. Like you're starting to see like the young guys establish themselves as legit NHLers, and I think that folding more of those guys in, both giving them a little bit of a runway too, helps for next season and expectations that like they might actually be in the lineup they won next year.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before. I think you've also got to be careful because when you've got the Wranglers who are right now leading the American Hockey League, you don't want to take too many guys out of the lineup either. I think that a long playoff run for that team is important for that development, and if you start gutting all their top players, you're going to make that more challenging too. So I think for every one you take out at this point, I think you're going to have to put one back in.
Yes, for sure.
And I don't know if you're going to take a guy out of the blue line who you're sending down.
Yeah, again, it would probably be like a Hanley or Miramanov.
And I think that you could lose both those guys to waivers. Like I think
Possibly.
there's a team that might say, hey, remember how Treliving used to always bring in weird like depth defensemen at the deadline for a fourth or a fifth? If you could get Hanley or Miramanov for free, I think someone might jump on that.
Probably.
So I don't disagree with you there, but I think that's one that we need to be a little more strategic on. And then the other move I was thinking of is, again, like Walker Duehr, as we talked about, not gone back to last year, the non-NHL ready Walker Duehr. And yeah, he looked good for his first couple games that they brought him up, but I think this guy's showing us that his upside is as an AHL guy with the occasional, game here or there fill in. I don't know why he's still on the Flames roster. Like, he's doing better in the AHL. Send him down, let him get some points, let him play there. He's not in the lineup, and if they want someone in the lineup, I think it's time to go back to Klapka or Dryden Hunt. Like, Dryden Hunt is a guy the coach likes. We saw him play a lot last year. If you want to bring up a guy who needs that time.
And Hunt could also play all three positions, so if you're worried about having a fourth-line center to replace Rooney, you could also throw him there.
Yeah, like if you're going to go on a road trip, they usually bring up a guy for a road trip, and they've got another one coming. Hunt seems like you said, kind of that all-around guy you can bring and know that he's good enough to play on your bottom six for a couple games.
Yeah, like realistically, like if they moved Rooney and Duehr down and brought Klapka and Hunt up, say, instead of Bishop, like that would be a perfectly valid swap, I feel, where you could more or less replace like with like and just swap out deck chairs to see, if the new guys can do better than the old ones.
Yeah, I just think, when we're seeing guys like Walker Duehr, who are obviously not effective and not in the lineup, I question why you keep them on the NHL roster. Send him back down, let him play, let him get what he needs, which is play time, and bring someone else up. Like, I'm just not sure why they're keeping him here.
Yeah, might as well cycle things through. It's not going to hurt.
Nope. And, someone might take Dryden Hunt maybe on waivers.
I doubt it.
I don't think so, unless someone has an injury at the same time. Like, there's a scenario I could see it happening. But, bring him up. Even if you keep Hunt here for the year, I think that'd be okay, too.
Yes.
And at this point, Jacob Peltier is now no longer eligible to go back to the American League without clearing waivers. I don't think Peltier goes back down at this point. He's shown after his recall that he is ready for the NHL. He's corrected some of the issues as to why they sent him down there at the beginning.
Yeah, and before his injuries, he was a very assertive player, and then when he came back from the injuries, he was not very assertive, and even in the preseason, he looked very lackadaisical at times in terms of getting into the areas he needs to be in order to be effective. And since his recall, he has been his old self, which is that effective third, fourth line agitator-ish guy that can chip in here and there.
Exactly. I guess moving away from that, do you want to talk a little bit about some Flames prospects?
Definitely.
Always good to see what's coming in the pipeline. Zane Parekh, the number 9 pick for the Flames this year in round 1, made history for the Saginaw Spirit on Saturday with a 5-point performance. putting him at the top of the club's all-time point producers from the blue line. He set a Spirit record last season for most goals with 33 and most points for 96, while taking home the Max Kaminsky Trophy for the OHL Defenseman of the Year and the CHL Defenseman of the Year. This year's 51 points are the fourth most among defensemen, and his 1.41 points per game is the second highest, trailing only Sam Dickinson. It sounds like Team Canada really missed out on a guy they could have used this year.
It's not like Team Canada was lacking offense in that tournament or anything, so it wasn't really a problem for them. Oh, wait.
I think Saginaw has a great defenseman here. This is probably going to be a guy who's going to be remembered in the OHL for a long time as one of the highest scoring ever defensemen. I still think that with some of the off-ice things we've seen with Parekh, there's some growing up to do before he's ready to be in the NHL, and I can even see this guy turning pro and playing American League for a year or two. I don't think there's any rush to get him on the Flames roster, but when I see that a goaltender's got a defenseman has got 51 points in 36 games, that's amazing.
Yeah. And realistically, Parekh, I think on the defensive side of it, needs to get better. He's decent, but he needs to be at least a passable NHL caliber defenseman. He's never going to be like a defensive stalwart for your team. Like, he's there to generate offense for you, but his defensive lapses are still a little bit on the slightly egregious side. More like just not NHL ready right now. So, him returning to juniors next year, I think, is likely. And then a year in the AHL is possible, depending on how he can shore up the defensive side of things.
Yeah, I just think that there's some growing up to do there. And, maybe it happens quickly, but I think they might need to put him in the AHL just to kind of teach him how to be an adult and a pro.
Yeah, because it's one of those where you can handle guys being arrogant and, overly confident. But, you have to also be able to back that up with your level of play. And, like we saw with Hunter Shinkaruk, for example, where, he had the attitude and demeanor of, say, somebody like Patrick Kane without that level of talent. And, you can be that kind of, guy if you can back it up. And we saw with Dion Phaneuf as well, where the ego kind of got in the way of him actually being able to progress as a player. So
I think also, not just with Phaneuf, but also with Tkachuk. There was a couple seasons here where, Tkachuk was struggling with that, kind of, I want to say that, mean enforcer, not really enforcer, kind of, sandpaper guy, and also, staying on top of his game and not drawing too much attention that he couldn't do what he needed to do and that sort of thing. So I think that, yeah, this is going to be something, I think you want some of that emotion from Parekh, but it's going to need to be tempered as to when and where. Yeah,
and like we saw with Rasmus Andersson, a lot of that similar attitude. But he was able to grow as a person and back it up with the talent. So, and he's become like one of the best players and most well-liked players on the team from the fan base. And it's a, two-sided coin where, if he can round out those parts of the game, he will be a fan favorite for a very long time. Or if he doesn't, he could get run out of town as well, just as easily, much like Phaneuf was.
It's interesting you mentioned Hunter Shinkaruk. I looked him up. He's still playing. He's playing for the Cardiff Devils of the British League.
That's interesting.
There's quite a few guys from Calgary on that roster, it looks like. There's defenseman Andrew McMillan. There's Jared Gorley. We've got Hunter Shinkaruk. We've got Reed Duke. It looks like a lot of Calgarians migrate. Team general manager Todd Kelman from Calgary. It looks like we've got a lot of Calgarians who migrate. I don't know if it's the whole league, but especially to this Cardiff team.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. So, didn't know he's still around. And then the other guy I wanted to talk about here is the Flames' 5th-round pick in 2024, number 150 overall, Luke Misa, who plays for the Brampton Steelheads of the OHL, formerly the Mississauga Steelheads. They relocated for this season. Also Saturday night, he came out flying with 3 goals and an assist in a big win. So we now see Misa sitting after 41 games with 24 goals, 33 assists, 57 total points. He got 81 points last year in the OHL. This goes to, I think, show the Flames and their ability to draft well late. I think Luke Misa is an exciting prospect, 5th-round pick, but a guy that I think will definitely turn pro and be successful as a pro. I don't know if he'll make the NHL, but I think, could be a fun guy for Wranglers fans to watch for a number of years.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if he lends more to the Matthew Phillips side of the coin or the Andrew Mangiapane side of the coin, and that's basically the 2 outcomes for this player, and it'll be interesting to see if he can find enough in his game to be more like Eatbread was for the team.
The big knock on Misa is his size. He's 5'10", 176 pounds. So he is a smaller guy. He's a center. I think he might get some potential looks just because he's a center, and we know, as we talked about, the Flames need centers right now. But I think that it's going to be a bit of an uphill climb for this guy. I think he's dynamic. I think he'll be a great AHLer. I'm not sure how much that's going to translate to the National Hockey League.
Yeah. It's one of those, whenever you're drafting a slightly undersized or fully undersized player, as they go through their development phase, are they generating a ton of offense? That's great. Okay, cool. Now do the same at the AHL level. Let's see that for a couple of years. Then can you do it at the NHL level, much like Rory Cairns, where he was a very good junior player as well and took a while to find his NHL game and is looking effective now. And
I mean, Cairns made a stop in Rapid City of the ECHL. Like, it's been a longer process to get there.
Yeah. And development is not linear, and you just hope at each marker along the way that they're progressing, and thus far, Misa is passing with flying colors.
He sure is. All right, big discussion of the week, Matt. The one thing I wanted to talk to you about, we've heard out of Vancouver some issues with Elias Pettersson and JT Miller not getting along. And now, I guess, the Vancouver Canucks trying to trade one of those guys. From what Elliot Friedman said during Hockey Day in Canada, Elias Pettersson's asked to stay, which means that JT Miller is probably the guy that gets moved. Do you think the Flames should try to acquire either guy?
Absolutely not.
I was going to ask you what a reasonable return is, but I agree with you. It's not even worth putting together a return because I don't want either guy.
No, if Miller was, 27 or 28, perhaps. But with him being 33, it kind of falls in the same category as us trying to trade Nazem Kadri. We're trying to kind of find a buyer for this player if the Flames are falling out of it type of thing. We're not really in the position of wanting to acquire more of that guy. And, as good as Miller is, as good as Kadri is, where the Flames are at, we absolutely do not need this player.
JT Miller has an $8 million cap hit for 7 more years, and he's currently 31. Elias Pettersson has an $11.6 million cap hit. He's 26 for the next 8 years. So whatever team takes these guys on is going to have a big cap hit. Even outside of the numbers, if these guys are disruptive, I don't want to bring them into my locker room. I don't know the whole story. I don't think any of us do. Is it just the two of them? Have they formed sides? If you bring JT Miller in here, how do we know he's going to, play nice with everybody? The Flames just spent a lot of time purging guys who didn't want to be here. Purging, Zadorov and Lindholm and all the guys they moved out last year. I don't want to bring another guy into what, from all accounts, is a very harmonious dressing room right now and disturb that.
No, and you look at the 08 to 2012 version of the Calgary Flames, and personalities fractured that dressing room, and we didn't really see certain personnel have much success once they were moved on from by the Flames. And it would be one thing like if
specifically talking about Lindholm, who Boston probably regrets that deal now.
Well, I was more referring to Phaneuf, that area of the Flames, or Lindholm specifically. Like that is also another good example. But unless you're a team like say Dallas, who's probably the only team that makes a lot of sense from the West to acquire Miller. Like he would be like the fourth or fifth most important forward on that team. So you can kind of get away with that more of a depth guy for your team, where with a lot of other teams, like he'd be one of their better players. And, it's less of a disruption if the guy's down in the depth chart a bit. But, if he's one of your primary guys like that, the more primary he is, the bigger problem it is.
I also don't see, let's be honest, if you're going to get either of those guys, you're going to be moving probably Rasmus Anderson plus. You're going to be moving for a first round pick. Right now, I don't think the Flames need that. Yes, it's fun that they're in a playoff spot. Yes, it'd be neat if they made the playoffs. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I don't think you should be trading your way into the playoffs at this point. This team is in a rebuild. We know they're in a rebuild. They know they're in a rebuild. They've acknowledged they're in a rebuild. I don't see what JT Miller or Elias Pettersson does to help with that. I think in anything, it's going to kibosh that rebuild because now you've got this big albatross contract that later on down the road, when this rebuild is over, you're going to regret. Yes, I know we've got a big Huberdeau deal. We've got a big Kadri deal. Huberdeau is coming back around. Kadri, I think, even at the end of that deal, will be a valuable depth piece. But why add another big veteran right now?
No, and realistically, with where the Flames are at, like if the onus is to say like add another second line scorer to this team, free agency is a thing. Trading at the draft is a thing where like teams are trying to shed salary and you might be able to pick up a serviceable player for cheap.
And we didn't see Conroy do it last year, but I will be disappointed this year if we don't see Conroy use his salary cap to take in contracts, even if they're just 1-year deals. Like he needs to use that. And I think that's the easiest way to get a depth centerman right now is absorb someone's contract.
Yeah. And like we can easily, either, take on draft picks to eat said contract or, give like a third or later draft pick at the draft to acquire somebody just to fill a roster spot. Cause, I think that the Flames more or less had like Sharon Govich and Kuzmenko penciled in as top 6 forwards this year, and both have drastically underperformed that. And I think that like they're going to want more of a certainty of getting at least second line caliber scoring from, sort of like getting an upgraded Anthony Mantha type guy. To complement guys like Huberdeau, Kadri, Zari, Coronado, etc.
If you bring in either one of these big, long deals, you're going to, in the long term, have troubles re-signing guys like Zari, guys like Pospisil, guys like even, I would say, Wolf down the road because you're not going to have the money. So I guess the question becomes, Flames fans are saying the Flames should go trade for these guys. Do you want to maybe win now with one of these guys, or do you want to see that we can maybe bring one of them in, maybe get deep in the playoffs here, but then we're just kicking the can down the road on this inevitable rebuild? Like to me, see it through.
Yeah, and realistically, like a team like Dallas, who has a close to expiring contract in Ben and Seguin, who are making basically the same money that Miller does, in a lot of ways, it's sort of like how we traded Monahan for Kadri, where we traded the injury player for the non-injury player playing the same second line role. You would kind of swap out Seguin or Ben and swap in Miller for more or less the same contract spot, getting the younger version of that player and move on from either of those two players.
I think that if a Miller or Pettersson deal gets done, Calgary will benefit somehow because there's not a lot of teams that can take on $8 or $11 million long term. I can see them coming to Calgary, wanting Calgary to broker that. Now, if I'm Conroy and I'm brokering that, because you can't broker only a portion of it, you have to broker it for the long term. So if you want me to broker $4 million for you for 8 years, it's going to cost you. But more than that, teams are going to have to move money out. Like I can see somebody wanting to bring Miller in and then having to make a trade with Calgary to dump another deal because Calgary's one of the few teams that has, more than $4 or $5 million to do that. So I think that one way or the other, if Calgary wants to, they can benefit from this.
Yes. And realistically, Calgary just right now is not in the position to be doing a trade like this, and it just logistically doesn't make sense.
It's neat and it's fun, and we always like to think about, a big star coming here. It's like when Jack Eichel was rumored to be coming to Calgary, and it's neat and fun to think about. But if you stop and think about where this team is at and what this team really needs right now in their process, this would be a really bad deal.
Yeah, like more realistically, like Calgary should be in the situation where, say, at the trade or at the draft, talk with Dallas, like assuming Dallas gets, because that's kind of the largest rumor is him going to Dallas.
I heard last night from Friedman that he was thinking the Rangers.
Yes. Would be like, say, calling up Dallas and say, hey, we'll take Sagan's last 2 years, because he's a center and a second line center. That, and for not very much, just to take the $9 million off your hands and, address it in a different way type of thing for the short term instead of, handicapping our team for like 7-8 years.
And let's be honest, even if you bring in a 26-year-old Pettersson, this team's going to need, even if they brought him in, he's not going to, take this team on his shoulders and be the difference. He's going to need another winger to play with. He's going to need a couple of the pieces. So he's 29 by the time this team actually puts the pieces in place they need from him. Like, you're going to waste those prime years of him anyways. It's not like if he comes in now, he's immediately going to, get the Flames to the cup.
No, and honestly, like we saw a similar-ish player here when Gaudreau was here. And like when it came to the playoffs, Gaudreau struggled because of his size. And Pettersson, while taller, is extremely skinny and is kind of easy to push off the puck. And he kind of wilts under pressure in the playoffs because of it. And, Pettersson is pretty much like the last player currently that I would actually want to build my team around because of that. And you need players that can perform in the playoffs. And as much as he's a very talented player, he's not that good in terms of being able to put up when it matters. And, Calgary, if we want to actually win a Stanley Cup, need to get guys more in the Kadri or JT Miller mold than Pettersson.
Mold on the ice, but not mold contract-wise. Like, you can't be taking on a 31-year-old with, 6 years left. The Flames have enough old contracts. You can't take that on right now.
No.
So I think it'll be interesting, like I said, to see the fallout. You mentioned Sagan. I think that's a possibility. But I think if the Flames want to, they can either broker some money on somebody or bring in a player, like you said, Sagan, who another team says, okay, we just took $8 million on, we got to move someone out. Hey, Conroy, you got some money, help us out here. And I would be surprised if Calgary wasn't involved in this somehow.
Yes.
If they want to be, right? There's only a few teams that have any money to play with right now. Calgary being one of them. I think the Ducks have more cap hit than the Flames do right now.
Columbus does as well. LA surprisingly has quite a lot of cap space, but if you look at teams that are apt to add money, Calgary is pretty much the only place that has generally spent near the cap that has the flexibility to add. Like the Flames have $17 million in cap space. Only Anaheim and Columbus are within $1 million either way of us, and then LA has $11 million, and a lot of that's due to Doughty being hurt for most of the year.
Yeah, and I don't think LA is going to want to spend all that because they got some contracts that need to be re-signed as well.
Exactly.
Montreal is $7 million, but they have 2 retained contracts already. So we'll see what happens here. But yeah, I think if the Flames want to be on this, they can.
Yeah.
But I don't think they should acquire either player.
No. And realistically, like the teams that are looking to add JT Miller, that's the teams that you kind of need to talk to, whether it's getting a guy like Chris Kreider or Tyler Seguin at the draft just to, we'll take your contract with like a year or 2 left on it.
Even before the draft. I mean, I could see that, happening mid-season because now you're bringing a guy in, you've got to clear the money to stay cap compliant if you're bringing in $8 million. Like I could see that happening within days of a Vancouver trade happening.
Yes.
Or even a 3-way at the same time because you've got to be cap compliant. I could see that all kind of happening at once, right? Let's just say it is Dallas. Miller goes Dallas. Dallas got to clear $2 million to stay cap compliant. So they move, let's just use your example, Seguin to Calgary all at the same time.
Yes.
I think that's the best way to go. Just because of the contracts, these are not the best way to go. And I think it's 2 things. The contracts and it's where the Flames are in the cycle, but even if the Flames were in a different part of the cycle, even if the Flames were ready to run for the Cup, I wouldn't want to take on 8-year deals.
Oh, no. And, realistically, there's nobody on the Flames that's worth an 8-year deal either currently. Maybe no. Rasmus Anderson. And that's a maybe. Realistically, the Flames just kind of need to shoot for the shorter, 1-2 years left on their deal or 3, just to tide them over for the time being as they go through this, development cycle.
I agree. Well, I think that's it for this week. Should we look ahead to the week that's coming?
Yes.
You and I didn't do too well with our predictions last week. I thought we'd beat Chicago and win the second St. Louis game, lose the first one, and lose to Winnipeg. You thought we'd beat Chicago, St. Louis, and lose to Winnipeg. Obviously, we bookended this week, won Chicago and Winnipeg, and lost both in St. Louis.
Yeah. We beat the worst team, we beat the best team, lost to the middle teams.
That's kind of sums up the Calgary Flames in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Over the next week, the Flames actually they've been on a road trip. They went on their 4-game road trip last week. Now they have 4 days off. They have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off. They play 1 game in Calgary against the Buffalo Sabres, and they're back on the road to take on Minnesota and the Jets again on the road. So on Thursday, the 23rd, 7 p.m. start time, Calgary and Buffalo. On Saturday, 5 p.m. start time, an early game against the Minnesota Wild, and then a back-to-back going from Minnesota to Winnipeg, a 4 p.m. start time on Sunday. So, Matt, 3 games on the docket. What are you thinking?
I think that the Flames beat the Sabres because Buffalo, and they lose the other 2.
So you think they're going to lose both Minnesota and Winnipeg? Why is that?
I think that both those teams are better than the Flames. I think that after, basically kicking the Flames' butt on everything but the scoreboard, that the Jets are going to be wanting to exact some revenge. And the Flames just don't really play that well against Minnesota, and Buffalo's not very good. So, and
that Buffalo game in the Saddledome, I bet it's not going to be well attended. Who cares?
Yeah.
So if you're looking for cheap tickets, this is probably the time to get down to the Saddledome.
Yes.
I'm being serious. If any of our listeners
same here.
Can't afford to get to a game normally, these are probably going to be affordable seats.
Yes. And yeah, there's not a lot of desire to see Tage Thompson, and I guess that's it.
The forever rebuilding Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah. Speaking of, would you be interested if the Flames targeted Dylan Cousins?
What's the price?
Well, that's the thing. Just getting the, center that he is.
I'm okay to target almost anybody. The question is what's going to leave. Let's have that discussion maybe next week of what would you give up for Cousins. I need to do some thinking there. But right now, I think for the price it would cost, just off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, I agree.
Where would you play Dustin Wolf this week?
I know this is going to sound strange, but I'd probably play them all 3.
Give them both of the back-to-back?
Yeah. I might give Vladar the Winnipeg game just to switch up the goalies, but yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing Wolf getting a little bit more of a runway, and like some different challenges of like playing two good teams in a row, and he's basically been passing most of the challenges that have been thrown at him. And so I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more thrown at him, just to, see where, like how he responds. Because, like after the bad game he had in St. Louis, throwing him back out there in Winnipeg, and he had probably his best start of the year. I'm just curious to see more of him, to see, like, can he handle like a 55, 60 game workload? Play back to back against two good teams, and like if the Flames are in a playoff push, you might want to start your starting goalie more than otherwise you would.
I'm not sure I'd put him in both of the back-to-backs. I'm not sure that there's benefit there. There's 5 more games this month. I think I'd play him in 4 of the 5, but I would give also, just to get a different look for Winnipeg, I think I would put Vladar in for the Winnipeg game.
Yes.
I'd play Wolf Buffalo for sure. I'd play Wolf Minnesota. I'd play Vladar on the 26th against Winnipeg, and then coming up, I'd play Wolf again on Washington and Anaheim to end out the month. I think you need to start giving Wolf a starter's workload.
Yes, I agree.
But most starters aren't playing back to back unless there's a need for it.
Yeah,
and even if something happened to Dan Vladar in Winnipeg, it's easy to make a call up. I'd just bring Cooley up for that game.
Yeah, and I'm just curious to see more things being thrown at Wolf to see how he responds at this point, because like he has looked better and better as the season's gone on, and just curious because it's nice to see the Flames actually having a top tier young goaltender, and and especially if the Flames are going for the playoffs, you kind of do want to see if he can actually get us there as well.
Flames, just looking ahead, play almost every other from here on out, minus the time for the Four Nations face-off. I think you will see Dustin Wolf get a lot of time there.
Yes.
My prediction for this week, they beat Buffalo. I think they beat Minnesota, and I think that they're going to drop the second game to Winnipeg. I think Winnipeg's going to come out and say, we've got to hunker down and win this one, and we know Winnipeg can win against Calgary if they need to. So I think that you'll see Winnipeg take that game on the 26th.
Yep.
So enjoy these 3 games this week. If you're going to be in the Dome watching Buffalo, try to enjoy that game, and it's going to be an interesting week for hockey.
And as always, go Flames, go.
Fireside Chat is hosted by Dan Stevenson, co-hosted by Matt DeBorg. This episode produced and edited by Peter Marino. Fireside Chat is licensed under Creative Commons license. For full license details, visit firesidechat.ca.